Hello everyone, my name is Andrew. Today we continue learning Python, and today we'll talk about Django migrations. Actually, this video is not about Django migrations, but about all of the migrations, and I'll just explain migrations using Django as an example. Yeah, so let's start. The introduction was kind of whack, but still. Today we'll talk about migrations. So why do we need them, what are those, and how to use them. Again, every migration system is different, and I'll talk about like the general idea of migrations, and I'll show it using Django again as an instance. So if you don't know about Django, and actually that's my first video where you don't need to know Django because all of the previous ones were somehow related to Django, but for that video all you need to know is that Django is a web framework which has a very unique way of, not unique, but a very convenient way for us to use databases in that framework. So if we want to use databases, we have models. Model, it's like, if you have ever worked with ODM or ORM, you know what model is, but it's like a table in a programming language. So ORM, object relation mapping, I think you know about that. Well, you need to know about that, but you don't need to know how to build those models, how to create everything in Django. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a new app. So I can show everything in a separate app and then delete it. For example, by manage.py start app users. So that command will create a new app for me. As you can see, I have users folder right now, and also what I need to do is add that app into installed apps. You have already seen that I had that app, but I deleted it just to show the whole process. And now when I created my app, it doesn't matter what an app is, but again, we're talking about migrations today. What I have here is migrations folder. So what is that? When we create anything which is related to the database, we need a schema. So we need something that will show how our schema looks. What's the data that we're going to store? If we're talking about SQL, the schema is all of the commands that will create tables, that will alter tables, and that will create all of those things related to the table schema, not the table information. So not the records in the table or in those tables, but the schema, so the skeleton for that database. And if we want to do that in Django, we can go to models.py and create a new class, which will be called class, I don't know, for example, test model, which inherits from models.model. So now basically I'm creating a table, but in Python. So if you know about Django, then you know what all of that means, but I explain it for everyone who is not even familiar with ORM. So what are we doing right here? We're creating test model, and let's create a simple field, username, models.char field, char field with max length as 100, for example. So what I did here is I created a table named test model, and username is a column which has a type of varchar with max length of 100. Now let's open, I'll open my terminal, and what I need to do is write py manage.py make migrations. But before I do that, let's actually talk. How now can we translate that information, so that Python class, into a database? Because as you can see, I don't have a database, and I'll create one. So let me just start my Django. I think it will be created if I just run it. Yes, you can see I have db SQLite 3. So db SQLite 3, it's a simple database in a file. That's actually it. So a database in a file, and SQL database in a file. And how can I get all of my schema, get my whole schema and translate it or move it to the database itself? Because now I only wrote the code. And in order to do so, I can take two approaches. So I can take two paths. The first one is write all of the SQL queries myself. So what I'll do, I'll go to db SQLite 3, so I can open up my database right here. So as you can see, yeah, I have db in PyCharm, so it's just like a connection to the database. As you can see, I don't have any tables apart from SQL master, but I will not explain what is that, but it's just a system table. You can think of it like that. So I only have db, and now what I can do is open up my console or somehow connect to the database and execute all of the queries myself. So what I can do, I can write create, if you know SQL, create table, test model, then username varchar from 100. But why do I need to do that if I already have the code? The second approach is not to write your queries, so your own SQL queries, but to write migrations, or rather generate migrations. So what are migrations? Migrations are files that allow you to execute various commands that will change the structure of your database or anything, so that will change something, but in our case it's a change in the structure of the database. And those migrations will be generated automatically, and they will, you just need to run them. That's just the whole description. So now, in order to generate migrations in Django, we need to run py manage.py make migrations. Let's run it. Yeah, as you can see, I have SQL queries, but don't worry about those. So it says migrations for users. Users, it's my application. Users migrations 001 initial.py was created. So create model, test model. If I'll go, or if I'll refresh my PyCharm project Explorer, what I can see is 0001 initial. So that's the first migration. And what it says right here, it says that, first of all, generated by Django, migration is an initial, but I will not talk about all of those things except for the dependencies and operations. So operations are the things that we need to run on our database in order to get a state that we want to be in. So what do I mean by that? Now, what I want to do is get my model, in our case test model, and move it to the database. So create all of the necessary tables that will help me to, or will allow me to work with my test model in Django. And to do that, I need to run some SQL queries. And in our case, we'll run those queries. So in our case, it's migrations create model with name test model and fields ID username. So that's just it. Now our migration will create a model, but of course we need to apply those migrations by manage.py migrate. And yeah, as you can see, there are lots of queries, but after a little bit of time, we can go to the database and see that now we have not only SQL master, but if I refresh it, say OK, as you can see, I have lots of tables, and all of those are created by Django. Well, many of those are created by Django itself, because as you can see, I only have two apps, products and users. So if you've seen my Django ORM optimization videos, then you know that I created products and product type to show some optimization techniques, and also I created users test model. So as you can see, that's our model, and if I go there, I'll only see ID and username. So that's it. Now what we did here, we created a migration, or we generated a migration, because I did not write any code. That migration was generated by Django, and we applied it to the database. That's like the most simple explanation. But also what I can say is that migrations can be very, very different. So I said that what you can do is take two ways of how to move all of your structure of your schema to the database, so how to apply it. The first one is to write your own queries, and actually what you can do is write migration queries by your own. So you write SQL files. So if you don't know, you can write like SQL files. Let me just show it to you. If I just new, I don't know if they don't have it here, but for example, migration.sql. As you can see, that's an SQL file. What I can do here is create table, something, and so on. So what I can do is write migrations on my own. But why is that not a good idea at all? Well, it depends. And I'll talk about that right now. So why is that not a good idea? First of all, because it takes a lot of time. So time is money, and if we will write all of the migrations ourselves, then it will take like 30 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. Depends on how much changes you've done to your project and to your database. But still, it takes time, and we don't want that. We want to automate all of the things, and because of that, we would rather use automatic migrations. However, there is a problem, a very philosophical problem, which says that, or which states that migrations which are written on your own, so your own SQL queries, can have some errors inside of them. But if we are moving to automatic migrations, they also can have some errors, some mistakes, some issues with them. And that means that whenever you apply a migration, you need to be sure that that is the right migration. So you need to test them beforehand. But I still think that lots of migration systems, so we don't only have like Django migration system. We also have migration systems that do not write py files, but like really write SQL files that they will use as migrations. So I don't know the name of it, but actually I forgot the name. But there is a tortoise ORM in Python, so Django RAM, again, is where we write our models. ORM is like separate layer for you to work with the database, but with the objects of your programming language. That's just the most simple explanation. I think I had an explanation on ORM, so you can look for it. Maybe it will pop up somewhere here, but yeah, ORM is just when you have your objects in the database and you map them to the objects in your programming language, so you can work with them easier. And there is a tortoise ORM in Django, and Django ORM, like those are two different things, but Django ORM inherits from tortoise ORM. And tortoise ORM has its own, so the creators of tortoise ORM wrote their own migration framework. I forgot the name of it, but that migration framework is really, really good. I think it's much better than the one we use in Django. Because with that migration framework, you can copy all of the SQL queries, because they don't write like 00 initial py, but they write real SQL files. And what you can do is just copy them and apply them whenever you want. And also you can downgrade. So in Django, you can only upgrade. And what do I mean by upgrade? What if we have a change in our schema? For example, I add password. So models, let's add char field as well, max length 200. What do I need to do now? Because now that change is only in my programming language, so it's not in the database. And if I want to put it in the database, what I can do is write py-manage-py, make migrations, and also I can do it like that, py-manage-py, migrate. So make migrations just creates the file, but migrate applies those migrations. And as you can see now, we have an error. And that error is also really important. So what it says, you're trying to add non-knowable field password to test model without a default. Now I will just provide one of default value, for example, password, like that, or sorry, password, like that. But what does it mean? That means that our migrations know where they are. So I will talk about that a little bit later, but now, if we changed a state of our database, and I'll update migrations folder, as you can see, I have a new migration, and it says dependencies user 001 initial. So my migration 002 test model password.py is dependent on users 001 initial. Users, it's again the name of my application in Django. And it says here operations add field. So it does not say like create model as it says right here, but it only says add field. So what does that mean? That means that our Django migrations know where they add. So if my migrations didn't have an idea what's happening with the database, they would just simply write like migrations create model, ID, username, and then they would add password. But as you can see right here on the second migration, we clearly can observe that we only add a field. So we don't create a model. Once again, we only add a field, and thus our migrations know where they add. And actually, if we go to database and we will update our main, we will see the place where our migrations are stored. So Django migrations, let's just write OK. And as you can see what we have here, there is a table called Django migrations. And the table contains all of the migration files and the migrations files that were applied to our database. So as you can see what it says here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have ID, we have application, we have name, and we have applied. So that every of those migrations was applied at that time. And what does that mean? That means that Django knows what is the last migration that we applied. And therefore we can run, or we can run another py-manage-py, make migrations and migrate in order to create a new migrations that depends on those migrations that were already applied. And with that, Django knows at each point in time, Django knows when we need to run and what we need to run. So what SQL queries we need, or any queries that we need to execute in order to achieve our final state for our database. So that's how it works. Those are the migrations. And actually, what I can say is that migrations are very, very different in lots of cases, but migrations are everywhere. So if we're talking about any system, like any system, where you need to have a history of what was happening before, then you have migrations. So with migrations, for example, there is a tool called Terraform. Terraform, it's like a technology or an application that allows you to run or to deploy all of your structure, all of your architecture, or I would rather say architecture, so all of your architecture to the cloud. For example, you have 100 servers and you need to create all of those 100 servers. And you can do it with your bare hands, so you can just log in into your cloud provider web interface, so for example AWS or Google Cloud, and then do it with your bare hands. But again, it's easier to automate things, and because again those save money. And there is a tool called Terraform that will automate all of the creation of your resources on your web provider, so on the clouds. For example, if you want to deploy 100 virtual machines, then what you can do is just write a simple, like 20, maybe 20 line config file, 20 lines long, and that config file will create all of those machines for you. But in Terraform, we need to know at each point in time when we or where we at. So if we don't know where we're at, then, for example, I created only 50 machines and I need to add 50 more. If I know that I created 50 machines, that I know, okay, I need to only add 50, not 100. So there are lots of places, lots of technologies in IT that use migrations. Again, all of the ORMs, all of the databases use migrations. And if your system does not have migrations, then I think it's time for you to think about those, because these are very important in terms of replication. So if we're talking about simple database without any migrations, then what we can do is replicate each state of the database. But with the migrations, what we can do is we can apply only the first migration or only the second migration, and that will give us, or all of the migrations, and that will give us the state of the database at each point in time. So at each point in time, like whenever I want, I can have any state of the database using my migrations. So that's the whole idea of migrations. Those are the files that allow you to run your database queries, so allow you to build your database schema, and yeah, that's just what it is. Thank you for the watching. My name is Andrew, and good luck.